Hello, welcome to the No Horse Barred Witchcraft podcast. We've got a couple of questions. One specific person asking questions on the Thoth Witchcraft Patreon. Okay, so we figured it's probably best to try our best to hash this out. So there is obviously the turtle blood thing, because this is somewhat linked, I think, to the grimoire traditions. So in a lot of the grimoire traditions, I believe is grimoire varium, you can substitute your own blood for sea turtle blood and all that, but it gives no explanation whatsoever. It's just very much one of these ingrediency things. It just says, yeah, go and do this. It works just as well as your own. But don't use anything else, whatever you do. It's got to be the blood of sea turtle, or it's got to be your own blood. Why is that? Or it doesn't matter. That's what the book says. So mistaken, kind of lost in translation, occultists claiming that they've done stuff or seen stuff or can do stuff, which maybe they can, maybe they can't, lack of proof. Basically, I think what we're talking about today is people stumbling around trying to recreate the crazy occult experiments of others and not knowing really whether they're doing very well or not, because they're basing what their practice is and what they should be doing on the results of others. They're also basing what's possible on what other occultists are saying is possible. Now, the specific questions I think we got, Chris, were in regards to invocation, evocation, psychic development, and seeing, hearing, interacting with spirits. But obviously, this goes for anything, really.
Yeah, I kind of thought it was a good time to do this one because obviously we've got, a secret witch wars occurring this year, but also, which is why we haven't had any public ones for a while, and that actually a lot of people ask questions, I guess, over am I in the astral, am I not in the astral? Those kind of, am I invoking or evoking, and get kind of confused with these titles and kind of terminology that we throw around. And by we, I'm meaning the entire occult community, not just ourselves. And then they struggle to kind of go, well, is that what I've seen? Is that not what I've seen? When I'm referring to this, is what I'm even talking about possible? Because they've got an expectation, I guess, of what they feel it should look like. I know this kind of touch is on a lot of things that we've discussed before, particularly when we've done spiritual potato, and it kind of spans from there onwards, doesn't it? Of kind of where people have heard so many different things, and they compare, because they are hard to describe, aren't they, Liam? Like, it's not like the astral appears the same to anybody. There are kind of telltale signs. But at the end of the day, it's human beings expressing themselves and telling one human being what they think they've experienced and expecting them to know what they meant.
It's putting your own experimentation and practice and experience down into the written language. And that is where the lost in translation happens, because you do your best, but you don't necessarily know who's reading what you're writing. That's in regards to the books. Obviously, when you give a talk, or even talking generally, even just to one person, let alone a room full of people, the other person might not necessarily get exactly what you're talking about. Now, there's a lot of, quite rightly, people judging their own practices and comparing their practice to other people's, because that's only natural. If someone else can do something, then you're going to be thinking, well, I want to be able to do that. If no one else has been able to do something before, then you're probably not going to be one of those people that are getting all hard up on yourself saying, well, I can't do this. What people do, however, get hard up on themselves is, oh, everyone else seems to be able that they can do this, but I just can't do it. That's what I hear a lot of. and people don't talk about it. And because we very much are very up to talking about the things other people don't want to talk about, this needs to be the platform where we discuss it, because I'm seeing a bit of wishy-washy. Not going to lie, I'm seeing a lot of wishy-washy answers to this specific kind of line of questions that one of our patrons has asked. And it makes a very good point, because I'd not really given it a huge amount of thought. I just put it down to, like I think a lot of people do in the occult kind of community, just put it down to, well, a bunch of other people are saying, some of them will be trying to say something and explain something and not doing a very good job of it. Other people will be lying. And then other people still will be just set out to deceive, I suppose, which isn't necessarily the same as lying. It's more of a case of upping one's reputation, you know, particularly when it comes to if you're making your living from the books you publish, which unfortunately, when it comes to occult authorship and stuff like that, is a bit of an iffy area. There's a lot of it is all about fame and fortune, it seems, nowadays, as opposed to the work. But there we go. That's another subject in itself, I guess. So what is the question that we've been asked?
So the specifics of it, because I want to kind of lay this down in the right way so that they understand it, because I know we kind of talked about it briefly yesterday. But essentially there's a miscommunication potentially on multiple levels here, where not being a native English speaker and us not being native their language. So it is one of those also trying to apply layers that kind of understand. But they've tried to simplify it down, and we'll deal with one question at a time. And the first one is, how much is it realistically possible to see an entity layered over the physical world in a more or less waking state, regardless of whether or not that's in or evocation? Point is that it's visibly perceivable. My words won't work there. I couldn't get my tongue around that one.
You can perceive it with your eyes open as well as closed.
Yeah, and not in an astral state, or in such a deep meditative state that is practically sleeping. So basically, they're saying with the waking eye, how realistic is it for people to see an entity in front of them that they're trying to communicate with?
I would say it's realistic, but I would say a lot of the people that talk about that sort of thing either talk in riddles or make it sound like you have to either be born with that ability or you have to undergo some BS initiationary transformation where you light some candles and mutter a few words, like that Witch's Bible Complete says that. The spell to get the sight, ritual to get the sight,
God,
like you're going to fall asleep.
The bloody farars.
Yes. That kind of thing. So I would say it's common, but and definitely something that's useful and worth cultivating, that ability, but A, it's not 100% necessary, and B, I don't think that a lot of the people that talk about that, you can't necessarily trust them to mean exactly what you're perceiving that as. So a lot of the people that say, I saw a carte, doesn't mean they actually saw it. What that means is they saw some creature making a noises up in a tree somewhere, and they thought, oh, the presence of that spirit is there because of an associations. I got chased by a black dog. Oh, it must be a carte. You know, she was there. Whether that would be what a lot of people would consider to be a physical manifestation or not is open to interpretation. The interpretation of the person who had that experience. Obviously, what a lot of people are wanting is some weird meme looking kind of goddess figure to appear before them. That's what they want. They don't want something where they're thinking, was that a real dog or is that some sort of spirit dog? They want a tangible experience.
Well, we've talked a lot, I think, over the years, whether or not people have pulled all those comments together and actually taken them in. But we have talked a lot over the years about kind of what we call an invoke evoke, that kind of state of going where you're essentially using your astral eyes, but are looking at it as a lens over the physical. So where you know, lots of people describe this. I think best way to kind of explain that is when people talk about seeing auras and things like that, don't they? Which is actually where you're invoking your astral eye in order to be able to see something. When it comes to communication with a secondary spirit, then it's a point of letting them in. So that's where it becomes an invoke rather than the evoke.
So full physical manifestation of a spirit is what a lot of people are seeking and what people are really, really struggling with. Now, full physical manifestation is not the same as seeing, hearing, and feeling a spirit in the room. So if a spirit appears in the room and you can see it and touch it, that does not mean necessarily that that is a full physical manifestation. Most of the people that get to the level of being able to control full physical manifestations of spirits and the like do not care. Okay, they don't care. They don't care that much about making a full physical manifestation. What they care about is the work that they are undergoing. So the tests that would need to be, you know, undergone to check whether you have a full physical manifestation or just the appearance of a full physical manifestation are quite vast. Also, why are you going to want to do it? You're probably not necessarily going to want to do it if you're a magical practitioner that's summoning up some spirit in order to do some actual work, you know. The reason why I make this distinction, and it will be apparent when you actually do put some thought into it, is that everything that we hear, feel, and see, all of our senses, are literally just our brains interpreting. Right? Okay, so it isn't like you're in the room. If you hit something solid and it hurts, all of those things is the brain interpreting that. Okay, so there, other than some kind of scientific apparatus, you're going to base things on your perceptions in your sights. Now, if something was to be evoked, spirit, I use the Akate as an example. So say Akate, we did some sort of summoning ritual for, or wanted a full physical manifestation, and there's a bunch of people in the room. Maybe it's one of the Thoth events or something, crossroads working or something. And she appears, goddess appears in the middle of the room, 10 people in the room, everyone sees her. They go up and touch her, they can feel her. Does that mean that is a full physical manifestation within that room? No, it doesn't. Okay. It feels like it is, and it potentially could be, but there is no necessarily, you'd have to do a lot of tests to ensure that that is the case. And the reason for that is that you'll see a lot of higher level spirits have the ability to tweak and tap into that pathway. So if we think of your senses and the electrical impulses in your brain, what you see, sense, hear, all of that, a lot of the time a spirit will tap into that. They're not actually necessarily appearing into the room. They're just tapping into that and making it look like they are. They're interfering with your sight, so on and so forth. Now, in order for a spirit to do that, it needs some sort of understanding of the human physiology, the human brain and such. So it's normally the ones that a lot of people would consider to be intelligent and powerful that are going to be able to do that. Now, when it comes to manifestations, who cares? If something appears in the room and you can see it and touch it, you're going to assume that it is a full physical manifestation, especially if other people feel, touch it, and see it. So ultimately, it doesn't really matter. What I think the person, I'm presuming, wants to know is what are the most common ways of interacting with different classifications of spirit, and what is something that would be considered easy versus something that would be considered more difficult or rare. So how many people, if we got all of these would-be witches and magical practitioners in a room, and there's hundreds of thousands of them in the room, and we did a poll and asked them all, how do you say sense, deal with spirits? What are they going to say? That's what I think, or I'm presuming the person wants to know, and kind of roughly, almost statistically, where they feel they should be placing themselves in terms of what is their experiences and how do they measure up with the vast majority of other people. But you can go through the specific question because I think you've got it, haven't you, in front of you?
Yeah, so the kind of next part of the question is basically, if it's possible, what could be the missing piece for someone who's practicing a long time and is used to experiencing kind of a lot of those things, so mental communication, sensing spirits, having them assist, and basically having good relationships with said spirits. How, in what way, shape, or form should that, what's missing for them to be making this jump if they're not seeing it? So this is where it gets tricky for me, because I start to think, okay, well, what are you not seeing that you were expecting to see? Because if you're doing those things, then you must be achieving those in certain ways. So, are you going into dream state and seeing them there? Are you quite successfully going to astral and seeing them there? And to me, we've discussed it before, which is, and I'm going to use that same reference that I've said before today, is it's about tapping into those individual senses in order to, so not going into a full astral projection state, because I think a lot of people kind of go for all or nothing, don't they? They kind of go, either go into the astral or I'm sitting here. And I'm kind of like, well, actually, the best part is a kind of midway point, not just for your visual and being able to see, but also from your casting perspective, is where those things link up, so that your conscious, unconscious, and astral body are all kind of in a perfect line, in which you're able to reach through them all and pull something from the astral straight through into the physical, from a manifestation point of view.
So the problem is people trying to measure themselves up with others and increase their own abilities, not understanding whether something's possible or not. So I think we should just basically put out there anything is possible. Anything is possible, even if it means that you have to completely change this entire system of creation in order to make it possible. If the laws of physics are in your way, then it just means that you need to accumulate enough power and ability and standing
To bend them.
To be able to bend or change them. But technically anything is possible. So I would go predominantly with what do you want to happen and how economical is that to make that happen. So if you want to talk to a spirit and work with a spirit, and you want to do it in a physical manifestation where you want to evoke them into a full physical manifestation in order to have a communication, find out some information, work with them, whatever, then you may think, well, it's going to take me an awful lot of time and energy to do that. I might just do a partial manifestation or go and astrally project or do some scrying or something like that, because economically the real work is what I want to work with them for, not actually getting them on the phone, so to speak. Now, we're not going to focus on what you want to work with the spirit. Instead, we're going to focus on this idea of how one works with different spirits. So we've got about 10 minutes before we turn over to the Patreon. I want to be super stereotypical with this.
Yep.
So I'm going to oversimplify things. And this isn't based on reality in the real world, because this is an idealistic way of looking at it, and we don't live in an ideal world. So ideally speaking, what people will think is stereotypes are I'm born psychic and can see spirits, versus I need to switch on some sort of psychic ability. And there'll be an idea of what I do when I have no psychic ability is I gently work on this idea of psychic development, and slowly I have a stronger and stronger and stronger ability. Now, if something is in a full physical manifestation, it doesn't matter how psychic or not psychic are, you will see it, assuming you're actually not blind physically, but you will see it because it'll be a full physical manifestation. Therefore, psychic ability doesn't matter at all when it comes to a genuine full physical manifestation. Psychic ability also does not matter if the spirit itself is choosing to project an image into your mind. Okay, so that doesn't matter either. What happens, and what we need to think about with regards to psychic ability, is essentially overlapping or traveling. So do I want to peer into the astral but have my eyes open as well? Do I want to see this room? I'm seeing it on a 3-dimensional level, but do I now want to see it on a 4th-dimensional level or a 5th-dimensional level? That is where the psychic ability comes in. And the problem is that it's training the mind, not necessarily to activate some kind of psychic ability. What it really is training your mind and your psyche to be able to not break down when it sees what it says. Now, we've worked with many psychics and have trained many psychics over the years, and many of which are terrible, okay, and they've been born with the ability. And the reason is that it's very difficult for the human brain to comprehend anything past 3 dimensions. And psychics tap into past 3 dimensions, 3.3 and a bit dimensions, maybe going to the 4th dimension occasionally. But it's still very difficult for the mind to process that. So instead they process fragments and pieces, and those pieces don't always match up. Hence the breakdown in communications that happen. Now, true psychic ability is about that transitional point of being able to exist in 3 dimensions and then going and existing in 4 dimensions with your personality and consciousness intact, because of course you already exist in 4 dimensions. It's just that you are not consciously aware of everything you are in 4 dimensions. So psychic development is ultimately trying to get you to start to experience things in a multi-dimensional way. And people don't necessarily talk about that outside of theoretical physics. A lot of the witchcraft, magical, and occult books tend to focus on gifts and abilities. And all of these abilities tend to be BS. Not BS as in people can't do them, but BS as in they're not really getting the point across. That as soon as you get into 4th dimensional awareness, all of these abilities, you have all of them. You don't just get 1 or 2, you have all of them. And what it is these people that have 1 or 2 abilities, or are gaining more and more abilities, maybe they have clairaudience and can hear spirits or see spirits, or only pick up on certain frequencies, certain classifications of spirits. Oh, I only see dead people, I've never seen an angel. Or, oh, I've only seen some goetic spirits, I can't ever see dead people for whatever reason, that kind of thing. You've got to be thinking about it in terms of, well, they're on their way to experiencing things in 4 dimensions, but they're only seeing a little bit, okay, or only experiencing a little bit because they are just not used to experiencing that. So their 3-dimensional brain is trying to comprehend in its best way as possible a 4th dimensional state, and that's very difficult. They just have fragmentary peaks at things, and very often little self-control. And the aim, obviously, of the Thoth Mystery School with regards to developing psychic ability is to get you to that stage of getting to a 4th dimensional state. But it takes time.
And the biggest reason for that is, as the human experience is used to being perceived through a timeline, Flipping into the fourth dimension where time is not relevant means that it then becomes problematic for the brain that is designed to process time as a linear event, so or a linear stream of events. So the kind of fourth dimension stuff is that if you can, and I think a lot of people struggle with it because they can't get their brain around the concept, let alone the reality of it, which is that, you know, time doesn't matter, especially if you're coming from a you know, heavily different system such as, I don't know, Christianity or one of the Abrahamic traditions, where you're not talking, they don't even have a concept of reincarnation, that there is a kind of plutonic end to things, and actually understanding that, okay, well, how does this processing part work? If your soul is eternal, what is that, and how does that appear? And surely if I've existed multiple times, why don't I know all this? And it's all those kind of layers that through psychic development, you normally break those barriers down in order to get to the point. So, you know, there is aspects to this that actually starts off as something theoretical because you're having to break past what your brain has been taught to behave like. This three-dimensional brain is used to processing in the three-dimensional. So, you know, kind of getting past that. The same way that you get some people that aren't very good at their 2D processing, you know, people that struggle with reading. It's someone that's got dyslexia or something like that, where actually the two-dimensional is a struggle for them. When someone looks at a design board for mapping an installation, say, of either a building or a circuit board, and they look at the circuit board and they go, this does not compute, it's because they're struggling with the actual two-dimensional representation of something that is three-dimensional. So, you know, I can kind of get why people struggle with some of these things. But actually a lot of this is just reprogramming, because your brain can do it. And for a very long time, it has processed a lot more information than we're used to processing now. A big problem is we're now in the digital age where we're used to other things doing our processing for us.
Yeah.
And that comes with its own handicap, doesn't it?
So obviously people confuse psychic arts with magic and stuff like that in general, because there's a habit of separating everything out. But then the people that separate all this out are the ones that often do not understand. So when you see the psychics that see spirits and feel spirits and interact with ones, well, if they are really actually interacting fully on a fourth dimensional level, they don't need to ask spirits to do something for them, because very often the powers, magical powers and such, that spirits are said to have, all that is they are operating on a fourth dimensional state. They can walk through walls, they can interact with time, they can interact with the laws of the universe, they can do all these things, which if you are able to interact on that level, you yourself will be able to do that and won't need a spirit to do it for you, you see. So asking a spirit for the future, because it can see the future, all that means that it doesn't have a specific power. It's just a fourth or fifth multi-dimensional entity. It can see outside of time, you know, and which you can also do. And this idea of measuring yourself up on a tick list of powers and abilities, instead of thinking about that, which is where people stereotypically go with it, think about, well, actually, the more abilities of these I have, yes, the closer I am to integrating into multiple planes of existence, but actually, got to catch them all. But there we go. That is it for the regular edition of the No Holds Barred Witchcraft podcast. We'll take this a bit further on the Thoth Witchcraft Patreon.